Hello, Rachel here with Davis, Ladd, and April, and we are going to give you some tips from the trenches of our homeschool experience. Okay guys, what are some things that you want to pass off to other people? What are some tips or tricks that have really worked and made all the difference?
I think one thing I would say as a homeschool parent is do not compare yourself to every other homeschool parent that you see. And that can be really hard to do, especially in this world of social media and Instagram, and everything can look perfect and rosy. And so I would say be yourself, but be your best self. And by that I mean, don't compare yourself, but also don't be content with just mediocrity and just say, oh, well, I'm just who I am. I have this weakness, whatever. So challenge yourself, but also don't hold yourself to a standard of perfection. And I think what we tend to do, what I have sometimes done is I look at all these families that are doing so many things, like you have the RV camper homeschool family, then you have the farm family, then you have the one who's like raising honeybees in the backyard, and then you have the Latin person and the music and the sports and all that, and you lump it all into one imaginary person, and you think you have to do all of those things.
Right.
And so it becomes very stressful because it's almost like wives comparing ourselves to the Proverbs 31 woman, where it's like, oh my word, she does everything, And it's not like that because each of these families is different. They're doing maybe one or two of those things. Nobody's doing all of those things. So just to relax and take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm not going to compare. But on the other hand, I'm going to challenge myself to be growing and learning and improving myself because we all have strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
So don't be content with like, whatever, my kids can't read, they're 16, oh, who cares,
Yeah.
But also, they don't have to read by like 4,
Exactly.
So there's balance there. So.
Yeah, and that brings up another really good point, and that is have points that you're reevaluating what's working and what's not. Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to be every day because you'll drive yourself crazy and you'll overwhelm your children and probably drive your spouse crazy too, but have points in your homeschool year that you literally set aside and say, okay, how are we doing? Mm-hmm. What's working? What's failing? Mm-hmm. What are you enjoying, kids? Loop the kids in. What are you enjoying? What's working for you? Ask your husband, what are we doing great? How can I include you more? What questions do you have? But just do it periodically, not at the end of every day, not even at the end of every week. Right. You need to be able to roll for a while and not worry about that. Mm-hmm. But you need to have points at which you reevaluate and make changes. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of the freedoms of home education is if one of these textbooks isn't working,
get rid of it.
You can toss it out, right?
Nobody's gonna know.
Exactly. Or it may just be not the
season
season for that subject. Maybe it's just not connecting with your kids. Mm-hmm. And so if you have those points mentally, you can know you can make those changes. Mm-hmm. And do it together, right? Because I think sometimes the moms get the memo, this math curriculum that we invested in is really not working for the kids. And so coming to him and talking to him, so there's a trust that needs to be here too. But I think that's really helpful to give yourself the space to reevaluate and make changes.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing too is develop a philosophy of education. Yeah. So we've actually spent a good amount of time just kind of talking about what do we want our family dynamics to be? Mm-hmm. What do we want our family to feel like, to look like in the daily kind of flow of life? And we've spent a lot of time talking and thinking, like I've been thinking, okay, what do I want for my kids? And so develop, your philosophy may be totally different. Some people may be really, really into sports or very into like the music lessons, and some people like the classical feel or the, Charlotte Mason. There's so much variety, which is one of the beauties of homeschooling. You have that freedom. But develop your philosophy and say, what do I really, really want for my kids? And then work towards that goal. So if it means more nature time, more, kind of write even a list of like, here's the top 5 things we want as a family. Like, what would you say some of our top 5 goals as a family?
Well, we always have prioritized family time in the evening. We gave up on it at the dinner table. That just did not work. Chaos reigns at the dinner table. But for us, the best time of the day is at the evening when we gather, for an hour or so. We read together. We do family devotions, and it's just an open time for the kids to ask lots of questions. And I would say, as homeschooling parents, that's been really a priority for us. The dialogue and the interaction as well. Don't miss out on the conversations. If you're going to homeschool and you're going to go through all the chaos and all the difficulty and challenges, take advantage of at least when they're curious about things. So a lot of times when the children are asking questions, you might want to punt. I'd say take a moment to stop and think about it. The other thing that's really been helpful for us is bringing the kids along with your interests.
Yeah.
This isn't exclusive just to homeschooling, but homeschooling, again, you have the time to do it, is that fathers, if you're interested in something in particular, bring the kids along to that. Use it as a training opportunity. If you've learned something yourself that day, take a couple minutes to discuss what you've learned with them. And so we have a lot of kind of organic learning experiences throughout the day where we'll just, let me tell you what I learned today about this. I found this to be interesting. I read about this in history, or, as things have happened, with events, you bring them into that. And you say, hey, here's what's going on. And it's really spurred a lot of additional conversation. So that's been very helpful.
No, that's a good point. I want to reiterate your point about, you talked about evening family time, and we called it family worship. And I always like to use the word worship as opposed to family devotional, because it created a certain sense of what we were trying to actually do. And for us, sometimes it happened in the morning, sometimes it happened in the evening. It varied depending on the kids' ages and what our situation in life was. But it was the culture, the DNA of just how our family worked. It's centered around loving God. And it was always very simple. We would read some scripture, sing some songs. And who doesn't love to sing some songs with some cute little kids?
The little kid voices.
Oh, yes. And then we'd get on our knees and pray. It was just a beautiful experience. And then, as you said, lots of conversations would happen. Sometimes very little conversation, but we just went with the flow. And the way I like to think about it is, we weren't perfect in doing that, but our kids look back and say, we had family worship. Exactly. That was part of our growing up experience, part of the family culture. And so just honing in on the family piece, one other tip I'd want to share is when we were early in our homeschooling days, we were in the trenches in terms of having babies. So every time a new child came home, we stopped and we did family. And that was, I loved those times because one, there's a lot of learning and helping that needs to happen. So kids are helping making meals, with laundry, helping fetch a diaper or a bottle or clothes for the infant, spending time with this child, and we're all bonding together. And a lot of people might look at it and say, we didn't do school for 6 weeks. But I think we were doing some of the best school during those times.
We did life.
Because we did life and family.
Yeah, you're hitting on some things near and dear to my heart, just with family worship. I would say don't procrastinate on that one. Starting the earlier the better, and develop those rhythms so that now it's an odd thing when we're not gathering in the evening. The earlier, I think, the better. It also, as parents, we're tempted to procrastinate on certain things and kick the can down the road on things like discipline. And the older they get, the harder it is. And so I would say when you're in those moments of, a chaos day or something like that, and something comes up, address it then. Take the time and the energy, and you will do it many, many times, but eventually I think it gets a lot easier. And you're establishing those disciplines, those habits that I think are going to pay off long term.
Well, and let it be something that you enjoy doing. Now, I'm not saying it's not enjoyable all the time to discipline your kids. It's training, it's hard work. But if you stop and say, you know what, this is my calling. This is good for me and my kids. It calms you down, and you actually become better at that process.
It's like maybe C.S. Lewis said, those things that you think of as interruptions to the day, that is your day. That is God's plan for the day. So instead of looking at like, oh my goodness, this kid's having such a terrible attitude, why do you have to ruin reading time? That's the thing right there that you're supposed to deal with and address. And those little things are going to come up all the time. And if you're not home with your kids, you're going to miss those moments. And so that's one of the benefits of homeschooling, is that you have those opportunities to pour into them, to address concerns when they're small, and not wait till they're like 16 years old and realize, okay, we've got some major issues going on. So
well, it's kind of that moment of redemption, right? Because the enemy is trying to pick off your worship time or your reading time or your family time in general with one of these kids that's going to have a bad attitude or be selfish or poke his sister or whatever. And you have an opportunity to participate in the redemption of that by dealing with that. And the other kids seeing you deal with it is a way of disciplining them too. So, I mean, really, your point to just deal with it is so key, because those discipline issues are just foundational for building your homeschool. I've said for a long time that at the base of your homeschool is not the curriculum you choose.
Right.
It's teaching your children obedience. I mean, that's at the core of it, right? And it's serious enough that as we train our children to obey us, we're training them to obey Him. And so when we neglect that, we're actually setting them up for rebellion against God. And so that is a fundamental thing. When you're going to start homeschooling, make sure that you're not neglecting the discipleship and the discipline of your children.
And it's like the chihuahua in the fence that's trying to get out, to
Yeah.
run with the big dogs. The kids actually appreciate that safety and the parameters
do.
when they know, I'm not allowed to do this, I'm not allowed to have this type of attitude. They have outer restraints so that eventually they will have internal restraints. That's the whole point. When you let a kid just run wild and do whatever they want to do, that's not good for the kid, because that's not the real world. That's not going to fly, in the real world. So you're teaching them to restrain themselves by at first having, when they're 2 years old, pitching their temper tantrum. No, you can't do that. That's not going to work for you.
And if you are in a situation where you have procrastinated and you have ignored this for many years, and now you're seeing all the warning signs, and now you're thinking about homeschooling, I would say wonderful. It is not too late. There is great hope,
Right.
and I think it starts by acknowledging, as all of us have had to do as parents. Okay, we messed up, or we may have done something wrong. Even apologizing to the kids of, hey, we didn't get this right, but it's a new day, and it's a new change, and we're going to establish these rhythms that we wish we had done before, and it is not a hopeless situation. And so. We've all messed up as parents, and the wonderful thing about what we have in Christ is grace and His mercy, and the ability to strive after Him, and to gradually get more and more like Him, even as we go through the trials of life. So we press on towards the prize, and through that we take all these little moments that might seem totally unimportant, totally just unimpressive futility even. And through those moments, it actually makes a life. Don't waste the small moments.
Exactly.
Well, you talked about reinstating some rhythms or changing some of the rhythms. And so much of homeschooling is that freedom that you get to decide what the calendar looks like, decide what the week looks like, decide what a day looks like. And you get to feel the freedom. And that's not easy for everybody to do. But again, going to one of the calendar or scheduling tips that I would give our folks is holidays can often be stressful for folks. And it can be so busy that you just feel like you're going to run ragged. And one of the things that we would do every year is from Thanksgiving to New Year's, which is a long time, we would do family again. We would do the holidays. We would just take the break at Thanksgiving. And then afterwards, we wouldn't just rush right back into everything. We'd start doing things that were relaxing, enjoyable, creative, holiday-themed, Advent-themed. And then even New Year's, we would do goal-setting meetings with our kids to say, hey, here's the progress you've made so far this year. You're making good progress here. We're a little behind here where we'd like to be pushing it. So this next year, this second half of the year, let's aim towards these things. And it got them thinking about their own personal growth. It challenged them based on whatever age-appropriate challenges they needed, and it helped us get to know the kids really well as we had these one-on-one dialogues with them.
And I was just going to say, it was also a rhythm that our kids got used to. I mean, even now that they're adults, we talk
do
about
the same things.
They do, and we think about those old goals that we used to. And I'm sure you have them in a file somewhere. All the goal sheets that we had. And Thanksgiving is sort of now, they're all launched, but Thanksgiving's our holiday. And we remember coming together and doing Thanksgiving really well. So as you're doing these things when they're little, there's a payoff when they get older. You've already built these things in, because I think most all of us would agree we want relationships with our older kids. That means we build them when they're little. You don't just get it when they're older if you don't do the hard work when they're younger. And that's not to say it's not harder when they're older, because it has its own challenges, but it starts now as you build in those things. And I'm very grateful for all of those times that we just intentionally slowed down, because that's a gift that a lot of people don't have in our rush
Right.
culture
Yeah,
today.
everything is so rushed and busy.
Yeah.
And every family is going to look different. So your priorities might be different and the flow of your day might be different, but taking time to think about where could I fit this in the day and how are we going to do it? Like family devotions for us was never good at supper because our dinner table, if you've ever seen the 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, where they're like throwing the food, and like it's literally kind of like that. It's bad. And so that never ever worked for devotions. I have tried to have like candlelight dinners. I mean, I have really put some effort into it. It's not happening. They're like starving. They're like, you know.
We're working on it. It's a work in progress.
We are working on it. But afterwards, when everything's clean, that's when it works for us. So your family may be totally different. It may be, you know, morning time, whatever, but have these routines and also don't try to do 50 new routines because you're going to fail, like for sure. Try one new routine, get it down for like 6 weeks maybe, and then try adding one more. And you can't just overhaul your whole life all at once because we're not wired that way. We're not able to do that. And so if you write down all the things that bother you about your schedule or your day, and you might have 100, but you can't address all of them. So just write it down and say, I'm going to address the top 3, okay? This kid, you know, has a bad attitude during this time day, or whatever. Maybe the kid's hungry. Maybe he needs a snack at that time. So just brainstorming simple ideas that can address that actual problem, because it may be many different, you know, situations, and then just make it fit into your day and get off the comparison, get off the feeling of failure, I'm not doing enough. Play to your strengths, but then also shore up your weaknesses as a parent, because we all have places where we shine and then places where we're like, all right, I'm really struggling here. So play to your strengths. But
and I think one of the biggest pressure cookers for homeschooling is thinking, am I doing enough academically in particular? Obviously, we're a homeschool curriculum company. We specialize in science and math and Bible, and we care deeply for those subject matters and the training of our children in them. How do you balance that tension between academics and then just life in general in our planning? That seemed to be a common thing people wanted to hear more about.
Well, and I think that ties in with what we were just talking about in terms of most people in America feel the rush. When you homeschool, you get to decide how much do you want on your plate. And one of the things we did that really worked well was we thought in terms of a 4-day school week. Now, some people would think, well, how do you get it all done? Well, what that does is it builds in margin from the beginning. And so it doesn't mean you can't do anything on the 5th, 6th, or 7th day. It just means you're not going to stress yourself to not get it all done every single week. And one of the keys there is not wanting to compare yourself to even just the curriculum itself. We didn't get it done, or we did. And it's a good feeling to feel like you accomplished something. And the 4-day work week, or the 4-day school week, actually helped make that happen better than trying to keep shoving more and more in. And I'll add this to that same topic. When our kids became seniors in high school, one of the best things we did for our seniors was less rather than more.
yes.
Because like you say, it's so tempting to say, oh no, they're about to graduate, we've got to cram all this in the last year. I really believe one of the best things you can do is say, hey, we want you to be a lifelong learner. We're never going to get it all in.
Right.
So we're going to have an enjoyable senior year and really take in the memory of it and then send you off to keep learning.
Yeah, that whole investing in them and the joy of learning and igniting that fire, I just can't overstate that, how important that is. That you launch kids into whatever's next for them, a trade school, a career, college, whatever is next, with this know-how, how to discern what they're interested in and how to learn more about it. I mean, one of the things that was so interesting to me about our kids as they got older is, first of all, for Christmas, they all wanted books, which, I mean, just makes my heart sing. Just like, okay,
We did something right.
We did something right. But the kids, it did not occur to them that if there was something they wanted to learn, they thought it was just a book away. They thought, oh, I want to learn how to knit. I need a book for Christmas on how to knit. Or our one son wanted to learn Arabic, and so he's like, I need a book on Arabic or Turkish or whatever. They always thought, I can do that. I just need to get a really good book about that, right? And so that whole idea of igniting this love of learning, and you can, and that they love to read, and it didn't occur to them not to read, and they couldn't do these things, that's just a gift.
Yeah.
But very much related to that, the thing that I would wish someone had told me early on, and maybe they did, and maybe I just couldn't hear it, God's got it.
Yes.
I mean, my number one tip is breathe,
Yeah.
because your whole comparison thing is huge, right? So step away from social media, step away from all the comparison games. That's not where it is. But just remember that God's got it. He's sovereign. He put your marriage together. He sent you these children. This is his plan for your family to homeschool. He's got this. He's got a plan. You're not going to get it all done. You're not, even what you get done, you're not going to get done perfectly, right? But you can breathe in knowing that he is the great Redeemer. And as you pursue goodness and his glory and your very best, he takes it and he makes something glorious with it. And that gives you a lot of grace to walk in. And yet that's hard. It's hard to walk in that grace. It's hard to walk in that faith. But we're only called to do it one step at a time, not all the time.
One day at a time. You take
Right.
one day at a time, and you figure out your flow and just make it work for you, adding in new things as you can without stressing yourself out. I had the same temptation because Jackson just entered 9th grade this year, so it's like
he's
all the-
ninth grade?
He's 9th grade. He's high school, and so all of a sudden I'm like, we got to do everything. And
Yeah.
so I made this long book list for him, and then I thought the same thing. Like, you know what? You can't do everything.
can't.
And the fact that he loves to read and loves to learn, that's enough, because he's going to be motivated for his entire life through that. And if you can win that battle, which it's not even a battle if you are excited about learning. I think that's a key. Like, as a parent, a mom or dad, if you are excited and passionate about learning, it's going to pass on to your kids.
Yeah.
It's one of those like better caught than taught type of
yeah.
things. It really is.
And you see it in stages. You see the love of learning growing as you're giving them interesting books, and then you see, oh, I'm interested in maybe another subject, and you give them something else, and you're just, so establishing that reading, that love of reading, and kind of like this is a doorway into the universe of all things. And then watching that grow, finding interests that fuel that, but also then you start seeing they're not just a consumer, they're creating.
Yeah.
And we are now a consumer-driven culture. It's all about consumption and very little about creating.
Which
creating
leads
the
a lot
next
of
ideas.
emptiness in your soul.
And so, even though we could talk at length on this on a whole nother topic, one of the biggest things we have done is very much limited their screen time, and that has paid off by igniting their imagination, and they're not just consuming in front of a screen.
Exactly. They're actually building into the community and into the family and creating things and trying
they're
things.
curious.
Yeah.
Like, to have that curiosity. Little kids have it naturally, but you see it a lot of times as kids get older, they just kind of lose it because of the schooling, and it's like kind of crushed out of them. So to be able to maintain that as they're getting older and older is a beautiful gift. And I see that in your kids, I see that in our kids, and I see that in a lot of kids that have been given a love of reading, and parents who are kind of excited about the learning process, because there's so much to learn. Like,
much.
I go off on these tangents of like recently I was looking into like herbal medicines, and I started reading all this fascinating stuff. I've never read about this in my life. Well, then a week later I'm onto something else, like pigs or something, but it's fascinating. And as your kids have all these topics, and one's into airplanes, one wants to raise like pasture-raised chicken, like I was saying. It's amazing to see where God is leading all of their little hearts and their interests. And so just stimulate that. Just give them books, give them conversation, and let them go with it. It's so freeing, and it's also really, really fun.
Yeah.
Well, this has been, again, just a few tips from years of homeschooling, and there's plenty more where that came from, but I hope this helps you out.